I think all cultures and their use of language develop in a fallen character just because we're sinners. And therefore, even within the way we use language, there's going to be a down drag. And insofar as the use of the tongue is an index of what lies in the heart, language and heart disposition go together. So, you know, in my country, interestingly, in my upbringing, there were two uses of language kind of acceptable in the culture to which you belonged that, judged from a gospel standpoint, I think would be unacceptable. And one was the language that we all used about the English because we were Scottish. And because even if we didn't know our history, although, you know, I remember from almost infancy, Scottish history and the battles with the English were built into the way we thought about history. I don't know whether history has had a makeover in Scottish schools since then, but you were really reared to think about the English as the enemy, and it had a kind of sacrament in great sporting occasions, in which, as it were, the opportunity was given to vent your hostility to these other people. And whether it was for historical reasons or cultural reasons, you know, it was very acceptable. And it was very pervasive. For somebody to marry an English girl was, you know, really almost to transgress the taboos of the culture. And so in ways I certainly didn't notice until after I was converted. You know, the culture that molds you is a culture that molds what is acceptable speech, but the canon for acceptability is no longer the gospel. And so, you know, I think to me that's just another illustration of how the gospel is kind of constantly scraping away at the layers of sin manifestation that you've developed, often unwittingly, because of the culture in which you've been reared. And why the gospel is such a wonderfully sanctifying thing. And I think especially as the language of a culture sinks. You know, I think sometimes, especially with conservative Christians, the tendency is to go into endless lamentation and not to realize that, you know, that's fair enough, you know, we are burdened and broken-hearted about the state of the culture. But I think we don't often realize sufficiently the extent to which that gives the church an opportunity really to be a counterculture that makes people sit up and notice. And sadly, we may not have been a counterculture. We may just have been a more conservative form of the same culture. I put it this way, often if I'm on an elevator in a building and fall into conversation with people, I find it's just as I'm leaving the elevator, they'll say, "Where do you come from?" And I always turn around, now that I'm here, and say, "Columbia, South Carolina." And I see the kind of, you know, you don't really come from there. And I just, you know, I mean, it's amusing for both of us, but I often think, you know, I'd love our church life to be like that. That there would just be something about the way we pronounce our lives that people would say, "You don't come from around here talking like that, living like that."